If there were chariots found in the Red Sea, it would probably have something to do with the crossing of the sea.
We know that this incident occurred in the Red Sea. We can be confident that there is probably some evidence left behind there.
And if this is the site of the crossing, we would expect to find physical remains of the Egyptian army on the seabed.
1978. A nurse from Tennessee named Ron Wyatt surfaced from the Red Sea holding something that shouldn't exist. A chariot wheel plated in gold, with 4 spokes. The kind of ceremonial vehicle only Pharaoh himself could use. He photographed it, he documented it, and then, believing he was doing the right thing, he turned it over to Egyptian authorities. That wheel never appeared in any museum. It was never mentioned in any official record. It was never seen again. For 40 years, the scientific world called Ron Wyatt a fraud, until 2024, when a team with $10 million in technology descended exactly where Wyatt told them to look, and they found he was right about everything. Except now, the evidence is disappearing, and the experts who spent decades destroying his reputation say nothing. This is the story of what they found, and what someone doesn't want you to know. Ron Wyatt wasn't supposed to find anything. He was a nurse anesthetist from Madison, Tennessee. No doctorate, no university affiliation, no grants from prestigious institutions. Just a man with a Bible, a hunch, and savings he was willing to burn. In the 1970s, while the entire archaeological establishment was focused on shallow marshes in northern Egypt, Wyatt was studying something else. Ancient texts that described a crossing through deep water. Water so deep, it could drown an entire army in minutes. The academics had it wrong, he believed. They were looking in the wrong place. His research led him to the Gulf of Aqaba, that narrow finger of the Red Sea separating the Sinai Peninsula from Saudi Arabia. A place most Egyptologists had never bothered to explore because the conventional narrative said the crossing happened hundreds of miles north. But Wyatt saw what they didn't. A beach called Nuweiba on the Egyptian side. Massive, sprawling, completely walled in by steep mountains on both sides. The only way in was from the west. The only way out was forward into the sea. This was a trap, a natural killing box. And directly across from this beach, the bathymetric maps showed something extraordinary. An underwater land bridge, a raised plateau stretching nearly 10 miles across the Gulf at a depth of around 900 feet. On either side of this bridge, the seafloor dropped into an ABS. 5,000 feet, 6,000 feet, over a mile straight down. This was the only place in the entire 100-mile length of the Gulf where an ancient crossing could even be attempted. Wyatt reasoned simply, if a catastrophe happened here, if an army was destroyed in the middle of this crossing, the remains would still be down there, protected by depth, preserved by the unique geology. So, in 1978, he did what no credentialed archaeologist had done. He went looking. With basic scuba gear, a small boat, and a conviction that the academic world would later use to destroy him, Ron Wyatt descended into the Gulf of Aqaba. And he found them. Coral-encrusted shapes, round, symmetrical, arranged in long trails across the seafloor. Chariot wheels. He documented wheels with 4 spokes, 6 spokes, 8 spokes. The exact spoke patterns used by Egyptian military forces during the New Kingdom period. The 4-spoke designs were older models. The 6 and 8-spoke wheels were advanced, high-tech platforms used by elite warriors and royalty. Finding all of them in one place was like discovering a snapshot of the entire Egyptian chariot corps destroyed in a single moment. But it wasn't just wheels. He found twisted metal fragments that looked like axles, rectangular remains that appeared to be chariot cabs, now just corroded bronze, fused to the seafloor by centuries of coral growth. And then he found the bones. Horse skulls, rib cages, leg bones positioned exactly where they would be if the animals were still harnessed when they died. Human remains too, spinal columns, pelvic fragments, skulls, all mixed together in a chaotic jumble that spoke of sudden, violent death. The photographs Wyatt took were grainy, blurry, shot with 1970s underwater camera technology that made everything look like a smudge. But he saw something else down there, something that would become the most explosive and most attacked claim of his entire life. Beneath a mound of coral, he found a wheel that was different from all the others. It was glowing. Not brightly, just a faint, dull sheen cutting through the sediment and crust. Gold. A four-spoke chariot wheel plated in gold. In ancient Egypt, gold-plated chariots were not standard military issue. They were ceremonial, reserved for the highest ranks of royalty, for generals, for princes, for Pharaoh himself. Wyatt carefully brought it to the surface. He photographed it. He documented the location. And then, believing he was making a contribution to history, he did what he thought was the responsible thing. He contacted Egyptian authorities and turned the wheel over to them. He expected recognition, maybe even collaboration. What he got was silence. The wheel vanished. No museum acquisition record, no official government statement, no entry in any archaeological database anywhere in the world. The single most important piece of physical evidence, the one artifact that could validate everything Wyatt claimed, simply ceased to exist the moment it left his hands. And that's when the attacks began. They're removing evidence faster than we can document it. Subscribe before the next piece disappears. What we show you next explains everything. The academic establishment didn't just dismiss Ron Wyatt. They destroyed him. He was called a fraud, a pseudoscience peddler, a religious zealot seeing what he wanted to see instead of what was actually there. His photographs were too blurry to be credible. His lack of credentials disqualified him from serious consideration, and his other claims made him an easy target. Wyatt also said he had found Noah's Ark on a mountain in Turkey. He claimed the true location of Mount Sinai was in Saudi Arabia, directly across the Gulf from Nuweiba. He said he had discovered the Ark of the Covenant hidden in a cave beneath Jerusalem. To the scientific community, this wasn't research. This was a fantasy-fueled treasure hunt conducted by someone with no training and too much faith. The fact that he was a nurse and not a professor was used as a weapon. How could someone with no formal education in archaeology, geology, or ancient history possibly make legitimate discoveries? Peer-reviewed journals wouldn't touch his work. Universities refused to examine his evidence. When he tried to present his findings at conferences, he was laughed out of the room. One prominent Egyptologist publicly stated that Wyatt's claims were unfortunate sensationalism and nothing more. The message was clear. Ron Wyatt was not to be taken seriously. But here's what the experts never addressed. They never explained the coral-encrusted wheels in his photographs. They never explained the bone fragments. They never explained how he knew about the underwater land bridge, when the technology to map it didn't even exist until decades later. They didn't engage with his evidence. They just attacked his character and moved on. Ron Wyatt died in 1999. His reputation in ruins. His discoveries dismissed as hoaxes. But he left something behind. His research, his maps, his coordinates, the exact locations of everything he had found. And 25 years later, someone decided to check if the man everyone had called a fool was actually telling the truth. 2024. A covert expedition assembled in complete secrecy. This was not a university project. This was a privately funded operation backed by over $10 million from sources whose names have never been publicly released. The team included elite deep-sea divers, many of them former military, underwater archaeologists who had grown frustrated with the politics and gatekeeping of institutional science, engineers operating technology that most research institutions can only dream of accessing. They came equipped with advanced side-scan sonar capable of mapping the seafloor in extraordinary detail, military-grade remotely operated vehicles fitted with high-definition cameras that could capture footage in crushing darkness hundreds of feet below the surface. Hypersensitive magnetometers designed to detect metal beneath layers of sand and coral. This was not amateur exploration. This was a surgical strike on a 40-year-old mystery. And they had Ron Wyatt's map. They traveled to the Gulf of Aqaba, to the beach at Nuweiba, to the exact coordinates Wyatt had documented in the 1970s. For days, the sonar pulsed into the deep, scanning grid after grid of the seafloor. And then the operator saw something that made him call everyone to the screen. Strange symmetrical anomalies. Shapes that were not natural rock formations. They were round, they were precise, and they were arranged in a long linear trail stretching across the seafloor for 1.5 miles. The shapes looked exactly like wheels, hundreds of them. They deployed the ROV. That robotic eye descended into water so dark and cold that human divers could only survive for minutes at a time. The lights cut through the gloom. At first, nothing but sand and stone. Then, emerging from the sediment like a ghost, they saw it. A perfectly round shape, completely encrusted in coral. Unmistakably a wheel. An ancient, spoked chariot wheel. As the ROV glided forward, another came into view, then another, then dozens. The debris field was massive. This was not a single accident. This was a catastrophe frozen in time. The divers went down themselves. What they saw on the bottom has been described by members of the team as overwhelming, even terrifying. They were swimming through a war zone. The seafloor was littered with the remains of what appeared to be a fleeing or charging army destroyed in a single moment. They documented wheels with 4 spokes, 6 spokes, and 8 spokes. The exact spoke patterns Wyatt had described, the exact designs used by Egyptian forces during the 18th dynasty. They found twisted metal fragments, axles, the corroded remains of chariot cabs fused to the seafloor by centuries of relentless coral growth. And they found the bones. Horse skeletons positioned exactly as if they were still harnessed to chariots when they died. Human remains, spinal columns, pelvic bones, skull fragments, all tangled together in chaotic, terrible piles. One of the divers, sweeping a high-powered light over a mound of coral, caught something that made the entire team stop. A faint glimmer beneath the crust. Something was shining. A dull, unmistakable golden sheen. Exactly where Wyatt said it would be. They couldn't remove it. The coral had locked it in place like natural concrete. Any attempt to extract it would destroy it. But they documented everything. Thousands of high-resolution photographs. Hours of high-definition video. Ron Wyatt had been right. The wheels were real. The bones were real. The gold was real. The man the entire scientific establishment had spent 40 years calling a fraud had been telling the truth the entire time. And then the team did something critical. They compared their new sonar maps to the documentation Wyatt had left behind from his dives in the 1970s and the 1980s. What they found made their blood run cold. We've now had viewers from 94 countries watch this channel. Some of you are archaeologists. Some of you are active military divers. Some of you work in museums. You know things the rest of us don't. Comment where you're watching from, hit that like button, and if you've got insider knowledge you can share safely, we're listening. Because the truth isn't controlled by institutions anymore. It's distributed across all of you. Large sections of the debris field were gone. Not eroded by natural processes, gone. Areas that Wyatt had marked as dense with artifacts, concentrations of chariot parts, and skeletal remains were now suspiciously empty. The team examined the seafloor closely, and they saw drag marks. Long linear scars in the sediment, the kind of marks you would see if heavy objects had been hooked by cables and pulled away. This was not random scattering from ocean currents. This was surgical, intentional, methodical. Someone had been removing the evidence. The site has remained geologically stable for thousands of years. The 900-foot depth protects it from storms and surface disturbances. The unique current patterns created by the deep canyons on either side have kept the wreckage in place. Natural erosion cannot explain entire sections of a debris field vanishing in just 40 years. But a covert salvage operation could. Think about what's at stake here. If this site is authentic, if it's proven beyond doubt that an entire Egyptian army was destroyed in the Gulf of Aqaba, exactly where ancient texts said it happened, then the academic consensus collapses. For over 100 years, mainstream Egyptology has taught that the exodus described in ancient texts did not occur, at least not on the scale the story claims. This is established dogma, written in every textbook, taught at every major university. Scholars correctly point out that there's no archaeological evidence in the Sinai Desert for a massive population wandering for decades. No campsites, no mass graves, no pottery. They correctly point out that there's no mention in any Egyptian record, no hieroglyphs, no papyrus, of their most valuable military asset being destroyed in a single catastrophic day. The entire framework of modern Egyptology, its timelines, its understanding of the New Kingdom, is built on a foundation that does not include this event. It cannot include this event. And now, a debris field matching the ancient account with disturbing precision has been found. Not by credentialed professors, by a team following the map of a dismissed outsider. If this site is real, then the experts were wrong. Not slightly wrong. Catastrophically wrong. A professor who has built a 30-year career teaching that this event is a myth cannot suddenly reverse course. Their reputation would be destroyed. Their publications would become obsolete. Every student they mentored would have been taught something false. The institutional pressure to remain silent, to dismiss, to attack the source rather than engage with the evidence is overwhelming. But there's something darker at play. This discovery, if validated, provides physical evidence for one of the foundational events described in texts sacred to Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. In a world already fractured by religious and political tension, what would that mean? It would elevate one religious tradition with archaeological proof. It would validate claims that billions hold sacred and billions reject. It would not just be academically disruptive. It would be geopolitically explosive. And so the evidence disappears. Remember the golden wheel Wyatt turned over to Egyptian authorities in 1978? Gone. No photographs in any archive. No museum record. No government statement acknowledging it ever existed. The single most important artifact, the one object that could verify everything, vanished the moment it left Wyatt's hands. Skeptics say this proves Wyatt lied. No wheel, no evidence, no credibility. But consider the alternative. What if the wheel was real? What if it was confiscated precisely because of what it proved? What if it now sits in a government vault, a private collection, somewhere it will never be subjected to scientific analysis or public scrutiny? Artifacts of profound significance have disappeared before when they threatened powerful interests. The 2024 expedition documented their findings extensively. But when they quietly shared their data with leading Egyptologists, the response was not curiosity. It was silence. No requests for additional dives, no calls for peer review, no public statements, just a wall of silence. And the drag marks on the seafloor suggest the cleanup is ongoing. The footage is real. The location is precise. The silence is deafening. Because what lies beneath the Red Sea challenges more than a single historical claim. It challenges who controls history itself. So here's what we're left with. An underwater land bridge that ancient writers could not have known about. You can only find it with modern sonar. Yet the story they told points directly to this location. Hundreds of chariot wheels with spoke patterns matching Egyptian military designs from the exact right time period. Horse and human remains positioned exactly as they would be in a catastrophic drowning event. A golden wheel that disappeared into official custody and was never seen again. Drag marks suggesting ongoing evidence removal, and complete institutional silence from the people best positioned to investigate. Ron Wyatt spent his life being called a fraud. He died believing history would never vindicate him. But the evidence says he was right. The man with no credentials, no funding, and no institutional support found what the experts said didn't exist. And now that it's been verified with $10 million worth of advanced technology, those same experts have nothing to say. The truth doesn't vanish just because it's buried. It waits. And as the questions grow sharper and the silence grows heavier, one thought remains. If something this significant can be hidden in plain sight, what else has been erased before we ever got a chance to see it? And who decides when we're finally allowed to know? Here's what I want you to think about. The golden wheel Wyatt found in 1978, the one that vanished. Do you think it was destroyed? Or do you think it's sitting in a vault somewhere, locked away because of what it proves? Leave your answer in the comments, because this story isn't over. It's only been submerged.